The dust kicked up around her worn boots as Adelaide Jenkins struggled to right the overturned wagon, her fingers raw and bleeding from trying to shift the weight that had pinned her life's possessions beneath it. She had been traveling alone for 3 days since leaving Kansas, heading toward Colorado territory with nothing but determination, and a deed to land she had inherited from an uncle she barely remembered, when the wheel had caught in a rut and sent everything she owned sprawling across the prairie trail. Mason Quinn reined in his horse when he spotted the overturned wagon in the distance. The late afternoon sun of August 1876 casting long shadows across the grassland. He had been checking the fence lines on the eastern border of his ranch near Ordway, Colorado territory, when he noticed the figure struggling against impossible odds. As he rode closer, he could see it was a woman, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, her dress torn at the hem and covered in dirt. She was maybe 23 or 24 years old, and there was something in the set of her shoulders that spoke of stubborn pride, even as tears of frustration streaked through the dust on her face. "Madam," Mason called out as he approached, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "Looks like you could use some help." Adelaide spun around, her green eyes wide with a mixture of hope and wariness. She was 24 years old and had learned the hard way that help often came with a price, especially for a woman alone on the frontier. But this man, perhaps 27 or 28, had kind eyes the color of coffee, and his hands were already moving toward the wagon before she could refuse. "I can manage," she said, the words automatic even though they were clearly untrue. "I am sure you can," Mason replied, his voice gentle but firm. "But why should you have to when I am right here?" He did not wait for permission, just positioned himself at the wagon's side and began to lift. "On 3, push from your side. 1, 2, 3. Together they heaved, and the wagon slowly righted itself with a groan of protesting wood. Adelaide stumbled backward, breathing hard, and Mason steadied her with a hand on her elbow. The touch was brief, respectful, but it sent an unexpected warmth through her tired body. "Thank you," she managed, looking up at him properly for the first time. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His clothes were those of a working rancher, worn but clean, and there was something solid about him that made her feel safer than she had in months. "Mason Quinn," he said, offering his hand. "I have a ranch about 5 miles west of here." "Adelaide Jenkins," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who knew hard work. "I am heading to Ordway. I inherited some land there." Mason's eyebrows rose slightly. "That is where my ranch is, just outside town. What land did you inherit?" "The old Jenkins property north of town. My uncle Samuel owned it before he passed." "I knew Samuel," Mason said, his expression softening. "He was a good man. That is good land, but the house needs work. When did you plan to arrive? Today, if I could get this wheel fixed." Adelaide gestured at the wagon wheel, which sat at an odd angle, clearly damaged. "But I suppose that is not happening now." Mason crouched down to examine it, running his hands over the spokes. "The axle is cracked too. This needs proper repair, not a field fix." He stood, dusting off his hands. "It will be dark in a few hours. Let me take you to my ranch for the night. Tomorrow I will come back with tools and a spare axle, and we can get you moving again." "I could not impose," Adelaide protested, even as the thought of a roof over her head and perhaps a hot meal made her stomach clench with longing. "It is not an imposition," Mason said simply. "It is what neighbors do out here. You will freeze if you stay out tonight, and there are wolves in these parts." When she still hesitated, he added, "My sister lives with me. You would be properly chaperoned." That decided it. Adelaide nodded, too exhausted to argue further. Just let me get a few things. She climbed into the wagon and emerged with a carpet bag containing her most precious possessions. Mason helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Adelaide stiffened at first, unused to being so close to a man, but Mason kept a respectful distance as much as the saddle allowed, and his arm around her waist to keep her steady felt protective rather than presumptuous. They rode in silence for a while, the prairie stretching out around them in waves of golden grass. Adelaide found herself relaxing despite her circumstances, lulled by the rhythmic movement of the horse and the solid warmth at her back. "What brought you out here alone?" Mason asked after a time, his voice low near her ear. Adelaide considered how much to tell him. "My parents died of fever 2 years ago. I was working as a teacher in Kansas, but the school board decided they wanted a man for the position. When I received the letter about my uncle's land, it seemed like providence." "That was wrong of them," Mason said, and there was genuine anger in his voice. "You are educated then. I attended normal school. I can read and write, do figures. I am not afraid of hard work." She said it defensively as if he might doubt her. "I can see that," Mason replied. "Your hands are bleeding from trying to move that wagon alone. That takes determination." They crested a rise, and Adelaide saw the ranch spread out below them. It was more substantial than she had expected, with a sturdy 2-story house, a large barn, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Cattle dotted the fields beyond, and the whole place had an air of prosperity and care. "This is beautiful," she said honestly. "Thank you. I have been building it for 6 years now, since I came here after the war." Mason guided the horse down the slope. "It is starting to feel like home." As they approached the house, the front door opened and a young woman stepped out, shading her eyes against the setting sun. She was perhaps 19, with the same dark hair and warm eyes as Mason, and her face lit up with curiosity when she saw Adelaide. "Mason, you brought home a stray," she called out cheerfully as they dismounted. "Margaret, mind your manners," Mason said, but there was affection in his tone. "This is Miss Adelaide Jenkins. She had wagon trouble on the East Road. Adelaide, my sister Margaret. Please come in," Margaret said warmly, taking Adelaide's arm. "You look exhausted. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning," Adelaide admitted, and immediately felt dizzy admitting it aloud. "Lord have mercy," Margaret exclaimed. "Mason, take care of the horse. I am getting this woman fed immediately." Mason watched as his sister bustled Adelaide into the house, a small smile playing at his lips. Then he led the horse to the barn, his mind occupied with thoughts of green eyes and stubborn pride. Inside, Margaret sat Adelaide at the kitchen table and began pulling out bread, cold beef, cheese, and pickles. "Do not stand on ceremony, just eat," she instructed, pouring a glass of milk. "Mason does this sometimes, brings home people who need help. Last month it was a family whose wagon broke down. Before that, a cowboy who got thrown and broke his arm. He cannot seem to help himself." Adelaide ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger as her body remembered its needs. "He seems very kind." "He is," Margaret agreed, sitting across from her. "Too kind sometimes. People take advantage, but I suspect you are not that type." It was said as an observation, not a question. "I try not to be," Adelaide said between bites. "I fully intend to repay his help somehow." "Just being grateful is payment enough for Mason," Margaret replied. "He does not expect anything in return. Our parents raised us to help others when we can. They died when I was 12, and Mason has taken care of me ever since, even though he was only 18 himself." Adelaide felt a kinship with this young woman, both of them having lost parents too young. That must have been hard. It was. but Mason made sure I had everything I needed. He worked himself near to death sometimes, but he got us through." Margaret's voice was full of love and pride. "Now he has this ranch and I help run the house. We make a good team." Mason came in then, having washed up at the pump outside. "Margaret talking your ear off already." "Just telling Miss Jenkins what a saint you are," Margaret said with a grin. "Now you are scaring her off," Mason replied, hanging his hat on a peg. He caught Adelaide's eye and smiled, and she felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with hunger. That night, Adelaide slept in the spare bedroom upstairs, in the most comfortable bed she had known in months. But despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive. She kept thinking about Mason's quiet kindness, the way he had not hesitated to help, how he had not made her feel weak for needing assistance. In her experience, most men either ignored a woman's struggles or used them as leverage. Mason simply acted, as if helping was the most natural thing in the world. The next morning, Adelaide woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She dressed quickly in her cleanest dress, though it still bore the stains of travel, and made her way downstairs. Margaret was at the stove and Mason sat at the table, already dressed for the day's work. "Good morning," he said, rising as she entered. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," Adelaide admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "Sit and eat," Margaret instructed. "Mason is heading out after breakfast to fix your wagon. I thought you might want to rest here today." "I should go with him," Adelaide said. "It is my wagon, after all." Mason studied her for a moment, then nodded. "If you are sure you are up for it, it will be hot work." "I am sure." They set out an hour later in Mason's wagon, which carried tools, a spare axle, and supplies. The morning was already warm, promising a scorching afternoon. As they rode, Mason asked her about her life in Kansas, and Adelaide found herself talking more freely than she had expected, telling him about her students, her small room above the general store, the way the school board chairman had informed her of their decision with barely concealed satisfaction. "He said teaching was too important to be left to a woman's gentle sensibilities," Adelaide said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "As if I had not been doing it successfully for 2 years. Men like that fear capable women," Mason observed. "They see it as a threat to their own importance. You do not seem to feel that way." "My mother was the strongest person I ever knew," Mason said simply. "She ran our farm when my father was away, managed the accounts, made all the important decisions. She taught me that strength has nothing to do with whether you are a man or a woman. It is about character." Adelaide felt tears prick her eyes unexpectedly. "I wish more men thought like you." "Some do," Mason assured her. "You just have not met enough of the right sort." They reached the wagon by mid-morning, and Mason immediately set to work. Adelaide tried to help, but he gently directed her to unload the wagon so it would be lighter, which was actually useful work. Together they worked through the heat of the day, stopping only to eat the lunch Margaret had packed. Adelaide found herself watching Mason as he worked, admiring his competence and the way he explained what he was doing, never talking down to her but treating her as an intelligent partner in the work. "Hand me that wrench," he said at one point, and Adelaide did so quickly. "Perfect. Now, if you press down on this lever while I lift, we can get this axle into place." They worked in tandem, and Adelaide felt a surge of satisfaction when the axle slid home with a solid thunk. Mason grinned at her, his face streaked with sweat and grease, and she found herself grinning back. "You are a natural," he said. "Ever think about ranching?" "I am about to try my hand at it," Adelaide reminded him. "Though I confess I know more about books than cattle." "Books are important too," Mason said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Maybe you could teach again once you are settled." Ordway needs a good teacher. They have a school, just started one last year. The current teacher is 70 years old and mostly deaf. The children are not learning much. Mason tested the wheel, spinning it to check for wobbles. That should hold. Let me hitch up your horse and you can follow me back. We will stable your wagon at my place tonight, and tomorrow I will help you get to your property. You have already done so much, Adelaide protested. And I am going to do more, Mason said firmly. Adelaide, your uncle's house has been empty for 6 months. It needs cleaning, the roof probably leaks, and you will need help getting set up. I am not leaving you to struggle alone when I can help. My conscience would not allow it. Adelaide felt emotion tighten her throat. Why are you doing this? You do not even know me. Mason was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Because when my parents died, people helped us. The neighbors brought food, helped with the harvest, made sure Margaret and I did not go under. I swore then that I would do the same for others if I ever got the chance. Besides, he added, meeting her eyes, I would like to know you if you will allow it. There was something in his gaze that made Adelaide's heart race, something warm and honest that drew her in. I would like that too, she said softly. They made it back to Mason's ranch by evening, and this time Adelaide felt less like an interloper and more like a welcome guest. Margaret had dinner waiting, and over the meal, Adelaide told them more about her plans for her property. I want to make it productive, she explained. I have a little money saved, enough for seeds and maybe a few chickens. I thought I could sell eggs in town, maybe grow vegetables. Eventually, I would like to teach again, but I need to establish myself first. That is a solid plan, Mason said approvingly. I can help you get started. I have extra seedlings you can have, and my hens have been laying well. I can give you a dozen to start your flock. I cannot keep accepting charity, Adelaide said, though her heart was not in the protest. It is not charity, Mason replied. It is neighboring, and if it makes you feel better, you can trade me for them. You said you are good with figures. My books are a mess. If you could help me sort them out, we would call it even. Adelaide considered this. That seems fair. I would be happy to help. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Each morning, Mason and Adelaide would work on her property, repairing the roof, cleaning years of neglect from the small house, fixing the chicken coop and the garden fence. Each afternoon, Adelaide would work on Mason's account books while he handled ranch business. Each evening, they would have dinner with Margaret, talking and laughing like old friends. Adelaide found herself looking forward to each day, to the easy companionship and the satisfaction of hard work making visible progress. But more than that, she found herself drawn to Mason in ways that both excited and frightened her. She noticed the strength in his arms as he lifted roof beams, the gentle way he handled frightened animals, the sound of his laugh when Margaret told a funny story. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression soft, and wondered if he felt the same pull she did. On the 5th day, as they worked to clear brush from around Adelaide's house, Mason suddenly stopped and pointed. Look. Adelaide followed his gaze and saw a family of deer at the edge of the clearing, watching them with liquid eyes. The mother stood protectively near 2 spotted fawns, alert but not frightened. They are beautiful, Adelaide whispered, afraid to spook them. They have a den in those trees, Mason said quietly. Your uncle used to leave out corn for them in winter. They trust this place. They watched together until the deer ambled away into the forest, and when Adelaide looked at Mason, she found him already looking at her. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings, until Margaret's voice calling them for lunch broke the spell. That night, lying in the guest bed she had occupied for nearly a week, Adelaide admitted to herself that she was falling in love with Mason Quinn. It terrified her. She had known him for such a short time, and yet he had become essential to her days. What if her feelings were one-sided? What if he was simply being kind and she was reading too much into his attentiveness? But the next morning, as they worked side by side planting her garden, Mason said, "I am going to miss this when your house is ready and you move in." Adelaide's hands stilled in the soil. "Miss what?" "This. Working with you, seeing you every day." Mason sat back on his heels, meeting her eyes. "Adelaide, I know we have not known each other long, but I need you to know that I care for you. Not as a neighbor or a friend I am helping, but as a woman I am coming to love." Adelaide's heart hammered in her chest. "You love me." "I am falling in love with you," Mason corrected gently. "I have been since the moment I saw you refusing to give up on that wagon, even though any sensible person would have. You are strong and smart and kind, and I cannot imagine my days without you in them anymore." He reached out and took her dirty hand in his. "I know it is too soon to speak of such things properly, but I wanted you to know. I am not helping you just to be helpful. I am doing it because every moment with you is precious to me." Adelaide felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to admit it, even to myself. But Mason, I love you." Mason pulled her close, heedless of the dirt covering them both, and kissed her gently. It was Adelaide's first real kiss, and it was everything she had ever imagined, sweet and tender and full of promise. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "So what do we do now?" Adelaide asked, slightly breathless. "Now we keep doing what we are doing," Mason said. "We finish getting your house ready. We court properly so there is no scandal. And when the time is right, I am going to ask you to marry me." "When the time is right," Adelaide teased, feeling bold. "How long is that?" "Well, I would ask you right now, but Margaret would kill me for not doing it properly," Mason admitted with a laugh. "She has very strong opinions about romance and courtship." "Then I suppose we should not disappoint her," Adelaide said, though part of her wished he would ask her right that moment. Propriety be damned. They finished the garden in high spirits, and when they returned to Mason's ranch for dinner, Margaret took one look at their faces and grinned knowingly. "Finally," she said, "I was beginning to think you were both blind." "You knew?" Adelaide asked, embarrassed. "Everyone knows," Margaret replied. "The way you two look at each other could light a fire. I am just glad you finally admitted it to each other." The next few weeks were among the happiest of Adelaide's life. Her house came together beautifully, and she moved in at the end of September, though Mason visited every day, sometimes with Margaret as a chaperone, sometimes alone, which was slightly scandalous, but no one seemed to mind much. The people of Ordway had taken to Adelaide quickly, appreciating her education and her willingness to help anyone who needed it. The town school teacher, Mr. Winters, fell ill in early October, and Adelaide was asked to take over the school temporarily. She agreed eagerly, and found herself standing in front of 15 children ranging from age 6 to 14, feeling more at home than she had in months. The children were hungry for learning, and Adelaide threw herself into teaching with renewed passion. Mason would often stop by after school to walk her home, carrying her books and listening as she told him about her day. The whole town began to see them as a couple, and Adelaide felt the weight of expectation mixed with genuine happiness. She knew Mason would propose eventually, and she already knew her answer would be yes. But life had other plans first. In late October, a violent storm swept through the area, bringing hail and destructive winds. Adelaide's roof, which had seemed secure, developed several leaks, and water poured into her house, soaking everything. She was trying desperately to save her books and clothes when Mason appeared, having ridden through the storm to check on her. "You cannot stay here tonight," he shouted over the wind. "The whole roof might come down." "My things," Adelaide protested, but Mason was already gathering her most important possessions. "We will save what we can, but your life is more important than things. Come on." They made it back to his ranch soaked and shivering, and Margaret immediately took charge, getting Adelaide into dry clothes and wrapping her in blankets by the fire. Mason changed quickly and came down to sit beside her, taking her hand. "I am sorry about your house," he said. "It can be repaired," Adelaide replied, trying to be brave even though she wanted to cry. "It is just discouraging. I felt like I was finally getting established." "You are established," Mason said firmly. "You have a job, you have friends, you have me. A leaky roof does not change any of that." Margaret brought them hot coffee and then tactfully disappeared upstairs. Mason shifted closer to Adelaide, his arm around her shoulders. "Adelaide, I was going to wait and do this properly, maybe at Christmas with everyone watching, but I cannot wait anymore. These past weeks have shown me that life is uncertain, and I do not want to waste any more time." He slid off the sofa onto one knee, still holding her hand. "I love you with everything I am. You are my best friend, my partner, the person I want to face every struggle with for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" Adelaide's tears fell freely now, but she was smiling through them. "Yes, yes, of course yes." Mason pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small ruby. "This was my mother's. I have been carrying it around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment." "This is the right moment," Adelaide said as he slipped it onto her finger. "This is perfect." They were married 3 weeks later in late November 1876 in a simple ceremony in Ordway's church. Margaret stood up with Adelaide, and Mason's ranch foreman, Robert, stood with him. The whole town turned out, bringing food and gifts and well wishes. Adelaide wore a dress borrowed from Margaret, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers that Mason had somehow found despite the approaching winter. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Mason kissed her soundly, and Adelaide felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This man, who had stopped to help a stranger struggling with a wagon, had become her whole world. They spent their first night as husband and wife in Mason's house, which was now Adelaide's home too. Margaret had moved into the room that had been Mason's office, insisting that the newlyweds needed privacy, though she made it clear she was not going anywhere. Adelaide was glad. She had gained not just a husband but a sister, and Margaret's presence made the house feel like a true family home. As winter settled in, Adelaide continued teaching, walking the 2 miles to school and back each day unless the weather was too severe, in which case Mason would drive her in the wagon. She loved teaching, loved watching her students grow and learn, but she also loved returning home each evening to Mason, to the life they were building together. In the evenings after dinner, Adelaide would work on the ranch accounts while Mason read or whittled, and Margaret sewed or wrote letters to friends. It was peaceful and domestic, and Adelaide cherished every moment. But in January, a new struggle emerged. A neighboring rancher, Silas Drummond, began grazing his cattle on Mason's land, claiming that the boundary markers were wrong and that a full section of Mason's best grazing land actually belonged to him. Mason tried to handle it diplomatically at first, showing Drummond the legal surveys and trying to reason with him, but Drummond was stubborn and aggressive. "He is trying to steal from you," Adelaide said angrily, when Mason came home after another fruitless meeting with Drummond. "You need to involve the law. The nearest marshal is 3 days' ride away," Mason said wearily. "By the time he gets here and investigates, spring will be here and Drummond will have grazed the land bare. Then what will you do? I am not sure yet, but I will not start a range war over it. Too many people get hurt in those." Adelaide lay awake that night, thinking. The next day, while Mason was out checking his herd, she rode into town and spoke to the land office clerk, asking to see the original survey maps. Then she visited the town's lawyer, an elderly man named Mr. Carson, and laid out the situation. "You have documentation?" Mr. Carson asked. "I brought copies of the surveys," Adelaide said, spreading them on his desk. "And I found these." She produced older surveys she had located in the land office, showing clearly that Mason's boundaries were correct and had been for 20 years. Mr. Carson studied the documents carefully, then smiled. "Mrs. Quinn, you have done half my job for me. With this evidence, I can draft a legal notice to Mr. Drummond that will settle this matter without involving the marshal." Adelaide paid Mr. Carson's modest fee from her teaching money and took the legal notice back to the ranch. When Mason came home and found out what she had done, he swept her up in his arms. "You did not have to do that," he said. "Yes, I did," Adelaide replied. "You have walked through every struggle with me since the day we met. Did you think I would not do the same for you?" Mason delivered the legal notice to Drummond the next day, and while the man was not happy about it, he could not argue with the documentation. He moved his cattle back to his own land, and the matter was settled. Word spread through the area about how Adelaide had resolved the dispute with research and legal action rather than guns, and people began coming to her for help with their own problems, asking her to read contracts or explain legal documents. Winter gave way to spring, and Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. The joy this brought to the household was immeasurable. Margaret immediately began planning and sewing baby clothes, and Mason became almost comically protective, insisting Adelaide should not walk to school anymore, that she should rest more, eat more, be more careful. "Mason, I am not fragile," Adelaide said, exasperated but touched. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," Mason said stubbornly. "Not my wife. I want you both safe." Despite his worrying, Adelaide continued teaching until May, when the school year ended. The town had officially hired her as the permanent teacher, and she would start again in September after the baby was born. In the meantime, she helped Margaret with the garden and the chickens, worked on the ranch accounts, and prepared for motherhood. But in June, a new challenge arrived. A fire started in the hills east of the ranch during a particularly dry spell, and the wind pushed it toward their property. Mason and every available man rushed to fight it, digging fire breaks and beating out flames, while Adelaide and Margaret worked frantically to wet down the buildings and move the horses to safety. For 3 terrifying days, they fought the fire. Adelaide, despite being 6 months pregnant, worked alongside Margaret, hauling water and watching for spot fires. She would not let Mason's ranch burn while she stood by helpless. Mason came in occasionally, his face black with soot, to check on her, and each time she assured him she was fine, they were all fine. Just go back and keep fighting. On the 3rd day, rain finally came, a blessed downpour that put out the fire and saved the ranch. They had lost some pasture land in one of the outer barns, but the house, the main barn, and most of the grazing land were saved. Mason came home exhausted and found Adelaide waiting for him, dirty and tired but triumphant. "We saved it," she said. "We saved it," Mason agreed, pulling her close despite the soot and dirt covering them both. "I could not have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," Adelaide said, "but you did not have to. That is what matters." Their son was born in late August, a healthy baby boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. They named him Samuel, after Adelaide's uncle, whose inheritance had brought her to Colorado and to Mason. Margaret was a doting aunt, and Mason was a devoted father, often found in the nursery at night, just watching his son sleep. "I never knew I could love someone this much," he told Adelaide one night. "Except I feel the same way about you. How is it possible to have my heart walking around outside my body in two different people?" Adelaide smiled, tired but happy. "It is the best kind of struggle," she said. "The struggle to be worthy of so much love." When September came, Adelaide returned to teaching, bringing baby Samuel with her. The schoolhouse had a cradle in the corner, and the children loved having a baby there, taking turns rocking him gently when he fussed. It was unconventional, but it worked. The years flowed by, marked by seasons and struggles and triumphs. In 1878, they had a daughter, Emily, who was fearless and wild from the moment she could walk. In 1880, another son, James, quiet and thoughtful. Margaret married Robert, the ranch foreman, in 1879, and they built a house on the western edge of Mason's property, close enough to visit daily but far enough for privacy. Through it all, Mason and Adelaide worked side by side. When there was a drought, they struggled through it together, carefully managing water and watching their herd anxiously. When cattle prices dropped, Adelaide found ways to economize and diversify, suggesting they raise horses as well, which proved profitable. When Samuel got sick with a dangerous fever, they took turns sitting up with him for 5 straight nights until the fever broke. Adelaide continued teaching, becoming known throughout the region as an exceptional educator. Several of her students went on to college, an almost unheard-of achievement for children from a small frontier town. She taught girls as rigorously as boys, believing education was the key to making their own choices in life. And she taught boys to respect women as equals, using her own life as an example of what women could achieve. Mason's ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the region, but he never forgot the struggles that had brought them there or the people who had helped along the way. He employed men others would not give a chance to, judging them by their character rather than their past. He helped neighbors in need, just as Adelaide had needed help that day on the trail. And he loved his wife more with each passing year, never taking for granted the gift they had given each other. In 1885, when Adelaide was 33 and Mason was 36, they sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel was 7 now, already showing signs of his father's steady nature. Emily was 5, currently climbing a tree despite her mother's earlier warnings. James was 3, playing quietly with wooden blocks. "You ever think about that day?" Adelaide asked, her hand in Mason's. "When my wagon broke down." "All the time," Mason said. "I think about how easily I might have ridden past, been too busy or too preoccupied to stop. I think about how my whole life turned on that one decision to help. My whole life turned on my wheel, breaking in just the right spot for you to see me," Adelaide said. "It felt like the worst luck at the time, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me." "You would have been fine without me," Mason said, squeezing her hand. "You have never needed anyone to save you. You were already saving yourself." "Maybe," Adelaide allowed. "But it would have been a lonelier salvation. Mason, the best part of our life together is not that you helped me. It is that we help each other. Every single day, through every struggle, we choose each other." "Always," Mason said and kissed her gently. Emily fell out of the tree at that moment with a shriek, and both parents rushed over, but she was fine, just scraped and indignant. Samuel helped her up with big brother protectiveness, and James brought her his favorite block as comfort. The family went inside together as the sun set over the Colorado prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. In 1887, Ordway grew large enough to support a lending library, and Adelaide was instrumental in its founding, donating many of her own books to start the collection and organizing fundraisers to buy more. The library became a center of community life, and Adelaide taught anyone who wanted to learn to read, regardless of age. In 1889, a particularly harsh winter tested everyone's endurance. Temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid, and snow piled in drifts taller than a man. Several families in the area were struggling, and Mason and Adelaide opened their home, sheltering 3 families in their barn and house for nearly 2 months. It was crowded and sometimes tense, but they made it through together, and the bonds formed that winter lasted for years. Their children grew strong and capable. Samuel became known for his skill with horses, able to gentle even the most skittish animal with patience and kindness. Emily learned to read and cipher with the same determination her mother had shown wrestling that wagon years ago, and shocked everyone by announcing at 12 that she intended to be a doctor. Adelaide supported this ambition fiercely, ordering medical textbooks and arranging for Emily to apprentice with the traveling doctor, who visited Ordway quarterly. James became fascinated with the law, poring over Adelaide's collection of legal books and asking endless questions about justice and fairness. In 1892, Adelaide was offered a position as superintendent of schools for the entire county, overseeing all the small schools in the region. It was a significant role, one rarely given to a woman, and it came with both responsibility and criticism. Some felt a woman should not hold such authority, but Mason never wavered in his support. "You are the most qualified person for this job," he told her when she hesitated. "Man or woman has nothing to do with it. Take it. I will pick up the slack at home. We will make it work." And they did. Mason became more involved in the daily care of the children, and Margaret helped with meals and household tasks. Adelaide traveled to distant schools, evaluating teachers and curricula, fighting for better supplies and higher standards. It was exhausting work, but deeply fulfilling. The children watched their parents navigate these challenges together, learning by example what a true partnership looked like. They saw their father cook dinner without complaint when their mother was away on business. They saw their mother wake before dawn to finish paperwork so she could attend Samuel's horse show. They learned that love was not just a feeling but a series of choices, made over and over, to show up for each other. In 1894, tragedy struck when Margaret's husband Robert was killed in a ranching accident. A spooked horse threw him, and he struck his head on a rock and never woke up. The loss devastated Margaret, and Mason and Adelaide immediately brought her and her 2 young sons to live with them. Their household swelled again, filled with grief but also love and support. Adelaide sat with Margaret through the long nights when the pain was sharpest, holding her sister-in-law as she wept. Mason took over managing the land Robert had worked, making sure Margaret and her sons would always be provided for. The children rallied around their cousins, including them in games and chores, providing the distraction and normalcy that grief-stricken children needed. Slowly, Margaret healed. She would never stop missing Robert, but she found purpose again in helping Adelaide with her work in raising her sons in the daily rhythms of family life. Years later, she told Adelaide, "You and Mason saved me. I would not have survived without you both." "You would have," Adelaide said. "But like Mason told me all those years ago, you did not have to. That is what family does." In 1896, when Adelaide was 44, she received a letter from the territorial governor asking her to testify before the legislature about education funding. It was a tremendous opportunity to advocate for schools across Colorado Territory, but it meant traveling to the capital and speaking before a room full of men who might not want to hear what a woman had to say. "You have to go," Mason said when she showed him the letter. "This is your chance to make a real difference." "Come with me," Adelaide said impulsively. "I know it is busy season on the ranch, but I would feel braver with you there." "Then I will come," Mason said without hesitation. "We will make it work." They left the ranch in the capable hands of Samuel, who at 18 was more than ready for the responsibility, and Margaret, who knew the operation as well as anyone. Then they traveled to the capital, a journey that took 3 days by train, a modern convenience that still amazed Adelaide. The legislative session was intimidating. Adelaide stood in a cavernous room before dozens of legislators, acutely aware that she was the only woman present besides the secretaries. But when she began to speak about the schools she had visited, the children hungry for education, the teachers struggling with inadequate supplies, her nervousness faded. This was what she knew, what she believed in, and she spoke with passion and conviction. Mason watched from the gallery, his heart swelling with pride. This was the same woman he had found struggling with a wagon 20 years ago, but she had grown into someone even more remarkable than he had imagined. Not because he had helped her, but because she had embraced every opportunity, overcome every obstacle, and become exactly who she was meant to be. When Adelaide finished speaking, there was a moment of silence and then applause. Several legislators approached her afterward with questions and compliments. The territorial superintendent of education, an elderly man named Dr. Harrison, shook her hand firmly. "That was the most compelling testimony I have heard in 30 years, he said. "Mrs. Quinn, you have a gift." I hope the legislature listens. They did listen. Within the year, education funding increased significantly, and Adelaide's recommendations for teacher training and standardized curricula were implemented. It was a victory not just for her, but for thousands of children across the territory. On the train ride home, Adelaide leaned against Mason's shoulder, exhausted but happy. "Thank you for coming with me." "Thank you for letting me," Mason said. "Adelaide, watching you speak today, I realized something. When I stopped to help you with that wagon, I thought I was helping someone who needed me. But the truth is, you have helped me just as much, maybe more. You have made me a better man, a better father, a better partner. You have shown me what it means to face life with courage and grace." Adelaide turned to look at him, this man who had become her whole heart. "We have helped each other," she said. "That is what love is, Mason. Not one person saving another, but two people choosing to walk through life together, through every struggle, every joy, every ordinary day." They arrived home to find the ranch running smoothly and their children thriving. Emily, now 14, had assisted with a difficult calving while they were gone, and she described the process with clinical precision that made Adelaide laugh and cringe simultaneously. Samuel had successfully traded 3 horses at excellent prices. James had organized all the ranch paperwork into a filing system that actually made sense. "They are growing up," Mason said that night, watching the children from their bedroom window. "They are," Adelaide agreed. "Samuel will be ready to run his own place soon. Emily will go to medical school if I have anything to say about it. James might become a lawyer. And we will be old parents, sitting on the porch and watching grandchildren play," Mason said with a smile. "I look forward to it," Adelaide said honestly. "Growing old with you, Mason Quinn, is all I have ever wanted since the day you helped me with that wagon." Colorado became a state in 1896, and with statehood came new opportunities and challenges. Women began pushing for the right to vote, and Adelaide became involved in the suffrage movement, speaking at rallies and writing letters to newspapers. It was controversial work, and some people criticized her, but Mason stood firmly beside her. "My wife is the smartest person I know," he told anyone who questioned Adelaide's activism. "If she does not deserve a vote, then neither do half the men I know." In 1898, Samuel married a local girl named Catherine, a sweet young woman who loved horses almost as much as he did. They settled on a piece of land adjacent to Mason's ranch, and Samuel began building his own herd. Watching his son marry and start his own family, Mason was struck by how quickly life moved, how precious each moment was. Emily, true to her determination, left for medical school in 1899, one of only 3 women in her class. It was not easy for her, facing prejudice and obstacles daily, but she wrote home regularly, and her letters were full of passion for her studies. Adelaide saved every letter, proud beyond measure of her daughter's courage. James stayed in Ordway, working as a clerk in Mr. Carson's law office and studying for the bar exam. He courted a teacher who worked in one of the schools Adelaide supervised, an intelligent woman named Rachel, and they married in a quiet ceremony in 1900. In 1901, Mason and Adelaide celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Margaret organized a party, inviting seemingly everyone in Ordway and the surrounding ranches. The barn was decorated with lanterns and wildflowers, and people came from miles around to celebrate with them. As Adelaide danced with Mason under the lantern light, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. All the struggles they had faced together, from broken wagons and leaky roofs to fires and drought and loss. All the joys they had shared, from the births of their children to quiet evenings on the porch to moments of triumph large and small. "What are you thinking?" Mason asked, spinning her gently. "That I would do it all again," Adelaide said. "Every hard moment, every struggle, just to end up here with you." "I fell in love with your stubbornness first," Mason said with a smile. "That day with the wagon, you were crying, but you had not quit. You were still trying. That is when I knew you were someone special." "I fell in love with your kindness," Adelaide replied. "You did not just offer help, you gave it freely without conditions. You saw me struggling and you did not look away. You walked through it with me. You have walked through everything with me." "Always," Mason promised, and kissed her there in front of everyone, to whistles and applause from their friends and family. Emily came home in 1902, a newly minted doctor, and opened a practice in Ordway. She was met with some skepticism at first, but her skill and dedication quickly won over even the doubters. Adelaide watched her daughter deliver babies and set broken bones and save lives, and felt a satisfaction deeper than any personal achievement could bring. Samuel and Catherine had 3 children in quick succession, 2 boys and a girl, and they were regular visitors at the ranch. Mason delighted in his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope and treat animals with respect. Adelaide read to them and told them stories, and made sure they understood that they could be anything they wanted to be, boy or girl, if they worked hard enough. James passed the bar exam in 1903 and opened his own law practice, focusing on helping small ranchers and farmers protect their land rights. He took cases others would not, arguing passionately for the little people against larger interests. Adelaide recognized her own sense of justice in her son, and it made her proud. In 1905, Mason turned 54, and Adelaide was 53. They were no longer young, and the work of ranching was harder on aging bodies, but they adapted. They hired more help, and Samuel took over much of the day-to-day operations, though Mason still rode out every morning to check the land he loved. Adelaide stepped back from her role as county superintendent, though she continued to consult and advocate for education. She spent more time with her grandchildren, teaching them just as she had taught her own children, passing on not just knowledge but values. One evening in the fall of 1906, 30 years after they had met, Mason and Adelaide sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of each day. They did not always talk, comfortable enough in their love to simply be together. "You have any regrets?" Adelaide asked suddenly. Mason considered the question seriously. "I regret Robert's death, because it hurt Margaret and because he was a good man. I regret that we could not have more children, though the 3 we have are more blessing than I probably deserve. But regrets about us, about our life together? No, not one. Not even when I made you attend all those suffrage meetings," Adelaide teased. "Especially not then," Mason said firmly. "Adelaide, everything we have done together. You have made my life richer and fuller than I ever imagined it could be. How could I regret any of it?" "I do not regret anything either," Adelaide said softly. "Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts maybe, because those are the times when I learned what we were really made of." "We are made of stubborn determination and shared love," Mason said. "That is a good combination." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, one by one, in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear Margaret preparing dinner, humming as she worked. Tomorrow, Samuel's family would visit for Sunday dinner, as had become their tradition. Emily would probably stop by after her morning rounds, and James and Rachel might come if court let out early. Their life had become exactly what Adelaide had dreamed of that first night in Mason's home, when she had been just a struggling woman with a broken wagon and uncertain future. It was a life of family and purpose, of hard work and deep love, of struggles faced together rather than alone. "Mason," Adelaide said, taking his hand, "thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for not just watching me struggle, but for walking through everything with me." "Thank you for letting me," Mason replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "Thank you for choosing me every day for 30 years. 30 more," Adelaide suggested with a smile. "At least," Mason promised. The years continued their steady march. In 1908, Samuel's eldest son, named Mason after his grandfather, showed remarkable talent with horses and began competing in regional shows, winning ribbons and recognition. Emily's medical practice grew until she had to take on a partner, a young doctor fresh from medical school who was grateful to work with someone so skilled. James successfully argued a case before the state Supreme Court, establishing important protections for homesteaders. Margaret, now in her late 50s, remained an integral part of the household, though her sons had grown and moved on to their own lives. She and Adelaide had become more than sisters-in-law. They were true friends, confidantes who had weathered decades together. In 1910, Colorado held a referendum on women's suffrage. Adelaide, now 58, campaigned tirelessly, speaking at rallies and writing articles and convincing anyone who would listen that women deserved the vote. Mason accompanied her to most events, a silent but solid presence that showed his support. When the referendum passed, Adelaide wept with joy. She cast her first vote in the next election with Mason beside her, both of them overcome with emotion at this milestone they had fought for together. "This is for all the women who will come after," Adelaide said as they walked out of the polling place. "So they will not have to fight as hard as we did." "You did this," Mason said proudly. "You and women like you changed the world." "We did it together," Adelaide corrected. "I could not have done any of it without your support." In 1912, Mason had a health scare, a pain in his chest that frightened them both. Emily examined him thoroughly and prescribed rest and a change in diet, and under her watchful eye and Adelaide's careful nursing, he recovered. But it was a reminder of mortality, of the fact that their time together, however blessed, was not infinite. "I am not ready to lose you," Adelaide said one night, holding him close. "You will not lose me for a long time yet," Mason assured her. "I am too stubborn to go easily, and I have too much to live for." He was right. Mason's health improved, and by the spring of 1913 he was back to his normal activities, though he moved a bit slower and was more careful. Adelaide watched over him like a hawk, and he teased her about being overprotective, but they both knew how precious their time together was. Their grandchildren multiplied, and the ranch house was constantly filled with the sound of children playing. Samuel and Catherine had 5 children eventually. Emily remained unmarried, dedicated to her medical practice, though she was a devoted aunt. James and Rachel had 2 daughters, both bright and inquisitive like their grandmother. In 1915, the nation's attention was drawn to the war in Europe, though America had not yet entered the conflict. Mason and Adelaide, now in their 60s, watched anxiously, hoping their grandsons would not be called to fight. They had lived through enough struggle and loss. The thought of war was almost unbearable. But even as the world seemed increasingly uncertain, their love remained constant. They had built something solid and true, something that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger. Their ranch prospered, their children thrived, their community respected them, but more than any of that, they had each other. One evening in the summer of 1916, 40 years after they had met, Mason and Adelaide sat on their porch in their usual spot. They were older now, their hair gray, their bodies slower, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. 40 years, Adelaide marveled. It seems like yesterday and forever at the same time. "I remember every detail of the day we met," Mason said. "How determined you looked, how stubborn. How you tried to tell me you could manage alone." "I was foolish," Adelaide said with a laugh. "I could not have managed, not alone." "You could have," Mason said seriously. "You have always been strong enough on your own, Adelaide." "But you did not have to be alone, and that made all the difference." "For both of us," Adelaide agreed. "Mason, you have given me the most extraordinary life. You saw me struggle, and you did not just watch. You walked through every struggle with me. You made me believe I was worthy of love and partnership and respect. You gave me a family and a home and a purpose. You gave me everything." "You gave me just as much," Mason insisted. "You made me better. You challenged me and supported me and loved me even when I was difficult. You raised our children to be good, strong people. You changed this community, this state, with your work and your passion. Adelaide, you are the love of my life, and every day with you has been a gift." They sat close together, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, the same sky they had watched together for 40 years. Inside, Margaret was preparing their dinner. Tomorrow the grandchildren would visit. Life continued in its beautiful, ordinary way. As the stars emerged, Adelaide thought about the young woman she had been, struggling with a broken wagon on a dusty trail, thinking her life was over before it had really begun. She thought about Mason, the stranger who had stopped to help, who had seen her not as a burden but as someone worthy of care and respect. Everything they had built together had started with that moment of compassion, that choice to help rather than pass by. From that single act had grown a love that had sustained them through decades, through challenges and joys, through the ordinary and extraordinary moments that made up a life. "I love you," Adelaide said simply. "I love you too," Mason replied. "Always." They went inside together, hand in hand, as they had done for 40 years, and would continue to do for all the years to come. Their love story, born on a dusty trail in 1876, continued to unfold, a testament to the power of kindness, partnership, and choosing to walk through life together, through every struggle, every joy, every precious moment. The ranch that Mason had built and Adelaide had helped sustain would pass to their children and grandchildren, a legacy of hard work and love. The schools Adelaide had fought for would educate generations of children, giving them opportunities their parents never had. The example they set, of true partnership and unwavering support, would influence their family for generations to come. But more than any tangible legacy, they left behind the simple truth they had lived every day. That love is not just a feeling but a choice, made over and over, to stand with someone through every challenge, to celebrate every victory, to build a life together one day at a time. As they sat down to dinner with Margaret, their conversation filled with laughter and plans for tomorrow, Adelaide caught Mason's eye across the table and smiled. He smiled back, and in that exchange was everything they had been to each other for 40 years. Partner, friend, lover, helpmate, supporter, challenger, comfort. The struggles would continue because life always brought struggles. But they would face them together as they always had, walking side by side through whatever came next. And that, Adelaide thought as she reached for Mason's hand, was the greatest gift of all, the one that made every struggle worthwhile. Their story, which had begun with a broken wagon and a stranger's kindness, had become something beautiful and lasting, a love that had stood the test of time and would continue to shine like a beacon for all who knew them. In the Wild West of 1876, Adelaide had been a woman struggling alone. By 1916, she was part of something larger and more powerful than she had ever imagined possible, and it had all started because a rancher saw her struggle and did not just watch. He walked through every struggle with her, and in doing so, they had both found home.